Yeah, that's recording now. So I'll just introduce you guys. So thanks for coming this evening on this Monday. So basically what this talk is going to be is Fiona, who you can see on the screen, hopefully above, is the clinical lead for Farm Vet Champions, which is a program, a CPD program by the RCVS Knowledge. And I thought it'd be good to get more students involved, and basically a lot of the things in the program, which I'm sure Fiona will explain during this presentation, can be quite useful to pair alongside our antimicrobial teaching at university. There's also a really good little bit of information there about setting SMART goals. If you have any questions about the program or Fiona, feel free to ask us throughout. You can put your camera on or put it in the chat box and we'll be able to flag it. But yeah, a big thank you for attending, guys, and I'll pass you over to Fiona.
Brilliant. Thanks, Georgia. Thank you very much. So excellent, great. What can Farm Vet Champions do for me? So I'm just going to lead you in. You will notice that I'm predominantly a sheep vet. So Farm Vet Champions is all farm animals in the UK. I come from a sheep vet sort of angle. But let me start with, these are just a couple of the farms that you maybe turn up at alongside a vet you're seeing practice with, or in a couple of years' time, if you're out there in farm practice, here you are turning up at a farm to do a visit. But instead of it being 2023, that it is now, sorry, I want you to imagine it's 2043, i.e. 20 years from now. So for me, embarrassingly, that's less than a time since I graduated. You guys will definitely still be working in 2043. At least I hope you will. And just imagine, as you turn up at one of these farms, those sheep, you notice there are a few of them a bit too lame. Or as you get close to one of these buildings, you can just hear the calves coughing. And you wish you could just reach into the back of your car, as we have done for pretty much all our careers, and pulled out a bottle of antibiotics and thought, yeah, I'll use that. But by 2043, it's quite likely we won't have antibiotics that we can just use in that way on account of antimicrobial resistance. So that's where we're at. I know that you get this sort of teaching at college, but just where have we come from? So and the situation, you just have to bear with me for having sheep examples. Back in July 2015, a colleague of mine, Emily, who I work quite closely with, she's down at Synergy Farm Vets down in Dorset. Emily and Michael put this letter in the vet record. It's just the first paragraph there about multi-drug resistant E. coli in a lambing shed, and happened to know that farm that they were reporting there, they no longer lamb sheep inside on account of resistance to E. coli. So they can't, there is no antibiotic that they can turn to. And we know this is some work from Liverpool, from Jennifer Duncan, and they looked at a number of farms. We've just got 6 here, and they looked at the profile of E. coli recovered during lambing, and showed that on some of those farms, particularly farm 4, farm 9, pretty high levels of resistance to most of the antibiotics there. So that there aren't many options for those farms in terms of continuing to lamb inside. So we know we don't have anything authorised for use in neonatal lamb, oral use in neonatal lambs anymore. And even if you're turning to things on the cascade, if you've got resistance like this, there really isn't anything available. So when we look at the risks of antimicrobial resistance on every farm, what's going to happen? We know we're going to have more trouble treating bacterial infections. They're going to cost more. We may get access to antibiotics restricted, possibly quite rightly, most likely quite rightly. Farm productivity is likely to suffer, as will animal welfare. And that's going to have a knock-on effect on the image of farming, on the image of the veterinary profession, and certainly the risks to human health increase. So those are the sort of risks from a farmer point of view. Actually, I use this slide when I'm doing farmer talks. We know that there are solutions, and these are some of the common sort of mantras: use as little as possible, but as much as necessary. Make sure we give the right drug to the right dose to the right at the right time to the right animal. Those sort of things, and it is increasingly important. So if we go back to a few of the figures, this is reports from last year, the FAVS report, looking at, once again, I'm still looking at E. coli in neonatal lambs, and we can see that we've got quite high levels of resistance to spectinomycin and streptomycin, to ampicillin, to tetracycline. Tetracycline's the most common antibiotics used in sheep, but also we've got resistance in the third and fourth generation cephalosporins and in enrofloxacin, so the fluoroquinolones. So these are antibiotics of high priority, critically important in humans. And actually, there's always debate about how important the link is, how close the link is between animals and humans. A lot of the arguments, I would suggest, is as much for sustainability of farms and animal care. We know we're using the same antibiotics in animals and in people. So as far as I can see, there isn't really a need for a complicated argument. We just know we have to be responsible in how we're using them, both for the sake of our flocks and herds, but also for the sake of people. And when you think about people, think about maybe your family. So you probably have, those are my children, a bit younger than they are now, and my parents. When I think of my kids, think of maybe you've got nephews and nieces, maybe you've got younger brothers or sisters in the playground, graze a knee, and it gets infected, and we expect there to be antibiotics that we can turn to treat that. Or maybe one of them gets an ear infection, or some some bacterial condition that needs treating with an antibiotic, and we expect there to be antibiotics available. When we think of our parents, and maybe they need a knee replacement or a hip replacement or some other routine surgery, we expect them to be able to go into hospital, and for us not to be scared about the fact that they might get an infection that can't be treated. Certainly, that's a situation that unfortunately is changing, and we've kind of known it's been changing since the O'Neill report back in 2016. And there, Jim O'Neill, in that review that he chaired, they predicted that by 2050, i.e. less than 30 years away, we would face 10 million human deaths a year due to antimicrobial resistance. So that's more than we saw during the COVID pandemic. And unfortunately, we're on track for those figures, I would suggest. So back in 2019, we know that we had 1.27 million human deaths due to bacterial antimicrobial resistance, and nearly 5 million deaths associated. So we know it's becoming increasingly serious debate in the human world, but obviously the importance in vets. But we are making really good progress. We know we're making really good progress. We know that we have massively decreased the amount of antibiotics that we use in animals. We know we've decreased the amount of antibiotics that are used in people. You've probably seen these sort of figures. The sales for the amount of antibiotics we're using is falling. You've probably seen these graphs from RUMA, the responsible use of medicines in agriculture. So since 2014, we've seen quite big reductions. Arguably, it's really flattened out a bit now. And arguably, we should be doing more. It's not just about reducing use, though. It is about using antibiotics responsibly. We all know, we all want to be able to use them where we have to. and in clinical situations where we need to turn to an antibiotic for treatment when we need to. And there are many farm vets who are really proud of what we've done, and you may have heard of vets shouting about this really good news story, and it is a really good news story, but arguably it's probably poultry and pigs where we can demonstrate this. So in terms of ruminants, cattle and sheep particularly, we don't have very good data, and we haven't had very good data. We're encouraging farmers to be putting data onto the Medicine Hub. We're encouraging vets to be populating the Medicine Hub with data from specific farms. We really need better data in the ruminant sectors. And we also need vets to kind of take control, take responsibility, and be forming a lead for their clients. And that's where I am now getting to what the point of today is, talking about farm vet champions. So we put together this CPD, and we've got this ability to set and track SMART goals, which is what Georgia referred to at the beginning. And I would really encourage any of you who are listening to sign up. You basically put in very simple details about yourself. You watch a 5-minute video, and that signs you on. You can access all the rest of the material. It's freely available to students as much as anyone else within the practice. It's a massive collaboration across all UK livestock sectors. So it's led by the charity RCS Knowledge. So that's the charity partner to the Royal College. It's not part of the college, it's a charity partner. And certainly up until back in May, Farm Vet Champions was funded by the VMD. With all these people, but BCVA, sheep vets, goat vets, poultry vets, pig vets, BVA, NOAA, RUMA, everybody involved as partners within it and part of a collaboration. And the start off with was literally making CPD modules, so they're between 10 minutes and 40 minute sections as webinars. There's the introduction to medicines, all the legal stuff, all the stuff you have to know. And then there's a species specific bit: cattle, sheep. There's 3 sections on cattle: beef, sucklers, dairy cows, and young stock, covered all separately. Then there's goats, there's pigs, there's sheep, and the poultry, and there's 3 different sections on poultry as well, including game birds and layers and broilers. So and they're really easy access webinars. We've made them into podcasts as well, which that was a definite feedback from some of the vets spending a long time in the car. Actually, we'd quite like a podcast and then to look at the slides on the PDF. And then there's also this section, communications of behaviour, which personally I think is the best bit of it. Quite short sections on how to communicate with farmers, why farmers behave as they do, why vets behave as they do. It's all about attitudes and behaviour and communications. So they're quite nice bite-sized chunks. And that's, so the 20 hours of CPD is freely accessible, and it's specifically targeted towards general practice vets, but it's free to access, and it's as free to access for students as everyone else. But equally, any practice you're involved with, the receptionists, the nurses, the techs, anyone involved, practice manager, can access the material and see how it's relevant to their jobs. But for vet students particularly, and this is what it can do for you, is if you are sat there seeing practice, and we all know what it's like, you're there waiting for the vet to take you out on call, and either there's one too many students, or the vet goes straight from their lunch and forgets to pick up the student, or whatever it is, and you actually end up sitting in the practice twiddling your thumbs thinking, I wish I was out on farm and actually I'm stuck here for the afternoon. Well, that would be a perfect time to log on and do an hour or two of going through the Farm Vet Champion stuff. You know, it's quite engaging material. It's brilliant revision. As somebody who I did learn about poultry. I can't remember a lot about poultry. I certainly learned more from these poultry modules than I can remember learning when I was on the vet course, just because it's easy to access. It's quite bite-sized, and for each of the different particular species modules, for each one, they've pulled out the most important thing to know about. 45 minutes on the most important thing to know about antimicrobial use in that animal, which is really handy. So do use it as a revision tool. And the whole thing is it's not based on what antibiotic do I use for this condition, although that will come into it. What it's based on is, for every species, for every condition, is how can we as vets, as farmers, how can we plan ahead and prevent disease and protect the flock or herd? So planning ahead is ultimately using the vet, getting the diet right, getting records right, using records appropriately to make good decisions to prevent disease. So preventing disease is making sure the environment is appropriate and sheltered, clean, well bedded, make sure equipment is hygienic and appropriate to ensure that disease are prevented. And then how do we protect the herd or flock? For the adult flock or herd, that's pretty much making sure vaccinations are up to date. And for neonates, it's making sure they get a good quantity of colostrum. But thinking about vaccination, whilst I'm on it, and so I don't forget, let me just remind you, if you haven't seen it already, NOAA produced livestock vaccination guidelines literally just a year ago, and they've got sections on dairy written by Jonathan Statham, beef written by Joe Henry, and the sheep, which I wrote, looking specifically at the important priority diseases. Really, really worth accessing that document. And I think it's quite exciting because we categorized diseases that you can vaccinate against on these different farm species. And we said, what is a category 1 vaccine? High priority, and that is important in that flock or herd. So for example, for sheep, clostridials, foot rot, toxoenenzo, and pasteurellosis, I said those are category 1 high priority. However, what it does not mean every single flock, not every one of my clients will vaccinate against all 5 of those for sure, for definite. But what it does mean is that on every flock where I've had input, we have considered clostridials and pasteurella and foot rot and toxoenenzo. We've said these vaccines are available, we should be using it, do we have to use them, and why can we justify on this flock why we're not using them? So it just changes the rhetoric a bit from you can use this vaccine if you want to actually, if you haven't thought about it, you should be using this vaccine. If you've got a good relationship with your vet, if you've discussed it, if you've looked at it in your flock health plan, if you can justify why you don't have to vaccinate, which is, plenty of people don't have to vaccinate, but they do need to justify why they've made that decision. And that's quite relevant and quite important. So it's worth, anyway, I think that's quite an important kind of change the rhetoric. If you're interested, that this website, www.NOAA LVG, so LVG, Livestock Vaccination Guidelines, but if you Google NOAA vaccination guidelines, you'll find it. And if you go onto that website, not only can you access the whole document, but you can sign a pledge to say why you want to. I mean, that would be a brilliant thing for FAVS to do, actually, to say that you support that. But also just use it as a resource. It's got a load of stuff in there. It'd be really good revision for your dairy, your beef supplers, or your sheep. So that's one important bit of protect, is vaccination. The other important bit of protect is colostrum for neonates. And so in terms of good practice, planning ahead, this time of year, this is my sorting out sheep diet time of year, getting forage analysed, arranging a good balanced diet, just making sure everything is right before lambing. In fact, probably January, February is busier time for me. Once people start lambing, they're off lambing. This is where it's busy, planning that everything's going to go right. So plan ahead's very important. Plan, prevent, and that could be if you're outside lambing, that's your shelter outside. You're making sure it's clean. It's any exposure, you've got shelter there, that you've got good bedding if you're inside, that you're not in for any longer than you have to be, that the conditions are clean, that you've disinfected or sterilised lambing tubes and bottles and rubber rings and everything, basically making sure that the environment is hygienic and appropriate, and all of that can come into preventing disease, and that's so important that we plan ahead, prevent, and then protect the ewes by making sure they're in good body condition score, that they're vaccinated, that we don't have lots of lame ones in there, that they're clean, that they haven't, we're preventing disease by protecting them, but most essentially that they're fed well and that they can produce good quality colostrum, and so the lambs are protected. So that's sort of where the whole thing hinges for lambing, and calving isn't a huge amount different. It's just, I always like a sheep example myself, but and then when we look from an antibiotic point of view at how bad it was, this was some data from just published in 2017, so only 5 years ago. So vet students from Edinburgh, when they went out on their lambing practice, over 2/3 of the flocks were using oral antibiotics just in case, as preventative, and over 1/4 of the flocks were using an injectable antibiotic as well, or instead of. So fairly widespread, and you may well have experienced that when you spent time on sheep farms. We, about the same sort of time, we had a PhD at Nottingham looking at sheep farmer who supplied lamb's dead weight to one of the supermarkets, and survey in 2016 showed that over 1/4 of farms used oral antimicrobials on every single lamb, and it was only slightly reduced in 2017, and arguably that number might have reduced because it was the retailer asking the question. So it's always possible farmers were answering in a way they thought that they wanted to, knew that they should be answering. And also in those, it showed worryingly high levels of tablets used, which is horrific, really, because we know tablets, they're not licensed in food producing animals, they're licensed for dogs or cats. They're that's a definite no-no. And we're changing practice, but it's taking time. You guys are the future, so the more you can get on board, the better. So farmers using prophylactic antibiotics in lambs, they were doing it because they'd been told to do it by a vet. They're doing it because they thought it was the right thing to do, and they had been told that was the right thing to do. So this is not in any way a blaming thing. Certainly, that's what vets believe was the right way to treat the disease. That's what vets told farmers, and arguably it had kind of gone on longer than it should have done, that people were too scared to not use those antibiotics anymore. But they were doing it for the right reasons, and then it's been a massive educational thing to help people realize they don't have to. And when we made huge progress back in 2016, there were 11.5 million doses of oral antibiotics sold for UK lambs, which we worked away at gradually with education programs. So by 2021, we were at 5.5 million doses. The product was then withdrawn, so it's much harder to track now. But we know we've made good progress. It would be nice if we could still track it, but it's more important that people are not using them when they shouldn't be. So that's a bit of the story of where people are out in practice. Why is it important? And if you think about where you are when you go onto a sheep farm or onto a beef farm, or one of your clients costs are really important. So what are you thinking about? And what's the farmer thinking about? Actually, what's the vet's thinking about when the farmer says, oh, what's that going to cost me? The vet and med costs for any animal, for any flock or herd, you need to know how to defend that. And there's two elements to it, and it's really helpful if you can get those two elements different in your mind. There's the bad health costs, which is treating disease, loss of production, any cost of disease, any cost of poor performance. Those are all what I would call bad health costs. And then there are the good health costs, which is investment in preventative measures, in flock health planning, herd health planning, in protecting the flock, in vaccinating the flock, anything that is an investment in that flock being healthy. So where we get our satisfaction as vets, it's not in being a hero and going to treat something that's ill, although we can all feel a bit good about that. Actually, it's not in the treating the ill animals where we get satisfaction. It's actually in stopping animals getting ill in the first place, which it sounds obvious, but I mean, it's really important, and it's really a kind of key to your sort of purpose of why you're there. And anything in these bad health costs are a sticky plaster. Anything that you're out there treating a disease, if you can have prevented that in the first place, you know, so much the better. So you're thinking about all of these when you're on farm, how to plan, prevent and protect the flock or herd, to prevent unnecessary bad health costs, and to invest in good health costs. If you're thinking about those and where the farmer should be investing his money, his time, what's the farmer thinking about? And the farmer is not in this blank space. So he's actually, he has got a load of things they're thinking about. If they're a sheep farmer, they're almost definitely thinking about the weather, but they're also thinking about everything else to do with the flock, whether the lambs are growing, whether they've got parasites, whether there's a bit of a disease risk in the lambing shed, whether the grass is growing, how healthy the sheep are. You know, that's some of the things they're thinking about. Some of the other things they're thinking about depends on who their customers are, whether they're getting a good price from the market or abattoir, whether the shepherd or the workforce, whether they've got enough labour. They're thinking about the man who drives up the drive to sell them a bottle of this or a bolus to cure everything, or they're going into the merchants and buying dose of wormer. They may be worried about disease and sending things off the lab. All these things are kind of on their mind in terms of health. They're also thinking about, they've got cattle as well, or maybe arable or a bit of machinery that's broken down. They've got other enterprises. They've got their life off the farm. They've got their family, everything else that's going on. You know, the vet or your visit or you talking about a particular thing is not top of their mind. It's part of this whole spectrum of what's going on the farm. And whatever the farmer's thinking about, whatever the vet's thinking about, we've got to have that communication between the two, and that application of what we know is good practice for animal health and what the farmer is trying to do in terms of good practice for animal health. The closer we can get this communication, the better. And it pulls me right back to Farm Vet Champions, because, and this is a section that I kind of dropped on but didn't dipped into but didn't tell you the details, which is the communication module within it. So you don't have to access them all, you can kind of pick and mix, but there's some really cool short, so these are 20 minutes, 15 minutes, 20 minutes, half an hour of looking at different communication techniques and different models, looking at human behavior change, the reset model, any participatory approaches, seeing things from a farmer's point of view and a vet's point of view, working out what cultures, why you think one thing, why your boss is thinking as the culture that's going on in the receptions, farmers coming to order antibiotics, and looking at motivational interviewing as well, which is what is it? Are you going to go on farms and tell farmers how to do things, or are you going to go on farms and have this discussion and motivate better practice? Anyway, there's some really interesting stuff there. It's really, really, really worth accessing and seeing what's there. And I just share these with a couple of people who are out in practice who have accessed the Farm Vet Champions. This is Harriet, who works down in the southwest, and it's the communication that she really picks up on about how important that is in communicating with the farmers. There's also so up in the top right, this is Emily, who's ruminant dairy vet in Norfolk. She was Young Vet of the Year in 2019, and this is one of her clients, Joe. Or Catherine Hart, who is on the BCDA board. She did one of the modules in the young stock section of the material. This is just taken from a video of her talking about the management of those calves and how she was prescribing, not prescribing antibiotics, but have actually worked with the farmer to plan ahead, prevent disease, and protect the calves by advising vaccination, for example. Here's another example. This is Stephanie over in Northern Ireland, and she presented her case looking at, it was basically reducing oral antibiotics in lambs, and it was a really high value flock. Farmer who was really, really nervous about not using prophylactic antibiotics, and Stephanie's talked through how she'd worked with him, held his hand, gone and visited, basically made positive changes on that in that flock to the benefit of the flock and the farmer, and did not see any disease increase in disease. So that's kind of showing you how it's working a bit in practice. If you think of some of the practices where you've either seen practice, some of the vets you know from home, specific situation, maybe any of you that have, final years or further on, you're applying for jobs, you're about to go and work at one of these places. I've literally taken these off the internet, so if you recognise any of these buildings, I'm not saying anything particular about any of these practices, but okay, generic farm vet practice, and think of every one of those practices. As a vet, we all have a story to tell, so we're all on a journey, and some people are further along it than others. So you can probably think of examples of beacons of people who've written articles or best practice, maybe a couple of those vets that I've already put up on the screen, like Stephanie, this is what I've done and this is how I've done it. But you also know that probably practices where you see practice or you spent time with vets and actually think, okay, or there are farms I know at home and maybe they are prophylactically treating high numbers of lambs, or they're putting calf antibiotic powder into calf milk, or actually they're using a lot of high priority critically important antibiotics, or maybe maybe not in farm work, maybe as people come in injecting cats at convenience, whatever it is, using high levels of antibiotics, is that the right thing to do? And also that some places have quite a lax culture about it. A farmer walks in and actually things are handed out and no one quite knows what they are going to, or no one quite knows once the antibiotic leaves the practice how it's used or whether it's used appropriately. But actually, as vets, as professionals, we kind of need to know. It's in our name. We are responsible as a prescriber. But what we do know is whether you're there as a third-year vet student or you're there as a new graduate vet in practice, or you know, one of your friends is a receptionist, whatever it is, each one of us has a place that we can make a difference. And it might, we know that things aren't perfect, we might be trying our hardest, but there might be little tweaks and improvements, and we each know what works best in our own situation. So there you are with your studies or whatever it is, or you're there in practice. What is the one step you could do to make a difference, to move things on? And it may be for you actually accessing some of the material and educating yourself would make the difference. Maybe it would be having a conversation with somebody within the practice or somebody within your teaching staff, and saying, can we do this? Can we, you know, is there something that I can do to improve the situation? And we all know about our own situation the best to be able to know what the next step is. And that's where we come on to the SMART goals. So a SMART goal is very specific and it's measurable, and it's both achievable and realistic. So we can be very precise about it, and it's time bound, so that we can actually make sure we're specifically saying what we'll do, how we'll measure it, we're making sure it's something that is achievable and realistic, and we're saying when we're going to do it by. And if you sign up to the Farm Vet Champions, on the programme, there is an opportunity for you to create your own SMART goals, and we walk you through it. So we go from SMART start and we step you through each stage of it. The categories are so it aligns with rumour targets. Who is the people that you're actually, is it with you, is the clients, is it with your fellow students, is it with your the people you work with, how are you going to do it, which species, and when you're going to do it. And you can either make individual SMART goals, which is fine, that can be you accessing some material, for example, or you can do something as a team. So you could do it as your FAVS group, you could do it within your university. So your university FAVS team is going to work as a team, and SMART goals, you're going to run some more CPD, or you're going to make sure that you've all accessed CPD material, or whatever it is. You can do it within your species, you know, BCVA or sheep vets. You can do it with your local practice where you see practice, whatever it is. A team can be whoever is appropriate for your situation. And then the platform walks you through each one, and you can always skip it if you think, actually, I just want to get something up there, I don't want to spend hours doing it, or you can work through it in detail. And are your SMART goals people focused? Are they around data? Are they around animals and flocks and herds? So it walks you through that, and then it helps you be very specific about how you make your goal. So it's written, they weren't designed for students, they were designed for people in practice. There's absolutely no reason you can't use them yourself, and you can't change. You can either use other people's goals, which arguably are more appropriate actually in practice, but you can equally modify them for yourself. So any goal is, you can use one that someone's already written, or you write your own. And so if it's a team, we commit to, or I commit to, so here we're talking with 10 farmers. You can make it a percentage if you want, about how to upload data to the Medicine Hub. So as I was talking before, actually the reputation of the meat industry or farming is a really, really key bit of our stewardship of antibiotics, and uploading data is where I think, you remember I said right at the start, we really lacking data for ruminant sectors, and uploading data to the Medicine Hub is one way each individual farm, each practice can share data of how well we're doing, so we've got a benchmark, and that's where the Medicine Hub comes in. If you've not come across the Medicine Hub, it's easy enough to access it, to see what it is. We're really trying to encourage vets and farmers to be putting data on there so we can track antibiotic use in cattle and sheep. There's a medicineHub.org.uk. There's plenty of details on how to upload data, but that's just let you know it's out there, and you'll hear more and more about it as we're increasingly trying to persuade vets and farmers to be putting data on there. But that's a possibility of a SMART goal for when you're in practice. But you end up with your individual goals, and this, for anyone, I commit to completing X number of training sessions by a certain date. You know, any one of us, student, vet, receptionist, whoever, really appropriate SMART goal. You can put your own progress in, that's self-reporting. You can say how you're doing. Here, Bob's practice, committing to speaking with 15 suckler clients on colostrum management, committing to putting their client accounts into separate species, so cattle accounts, sheep accounts separate. There's all sorts, there's no end of possibilities, and I would really encourage you to look at that. I'd really encourage you to get together in some teams, because then we can encourage each other. And, you know, if you want a student team, we've got Farm Vet Champion ambassadors. We meet sort of every 2 months or so, people at all stages of their career, and it would just be brilliant to have a FAVS ambassador team, or, you know, whether you do that as National FAVS or whether you do it individually or do it as both. There's no competition here. We really want this to work in whatever way it works for you guys and for vets out there and for everything. So, you know, come back to me and say, oh, we'd really like to have a FAVS team or a National FAVS team or a individual university team. That's, you know, we can easily, you can do that yourselves. You can ask us for some help if you want it. So there you go. That's a kind of leader slide. It is definitely ideal for revision, something to do on your EMS. It's definitely good for your SMART goals. And I'm going to end, and this is, I didn't tell Georgia I was going to do this. This will embarrass her. So I'll end with Georgia's fantastic quote that she did for us. I think it was only last week, wasn't it? Anyway, it's just out. It's just out now. But yeah, as a kind of leading the way role model, so Georgia's been talking about SMART goals and fine-tuning things. You know, we'd be delighted to work with anyone in pushing it out. So let us know. Right, I think I've spoken quite enough. I think I might, nice as it is to have that lovely photo of Georgie there, I'm going to stop sharing, and then if anyone wants to either turn the camera on and ask questions or put something in the chat, or whatever, fire away.
Thanks for moving the photo off.
It's okay, we've got the real you now, so we don't need the photo there.
Yeah, well, my hair's a different colour now, but it's fine. No, that was really good. Thank you. Like, thanks for coming to speak to us. I know definitely at RVC, we've the program's been mentioned in our lectures, especially during the antimicrobial week that we had at RVC, and they give that in third year. It was definitely mentioned at some point during that week. So I think it is starting to get out there more. But yeah, I think the more that we can spread the word through students, because we're going to be like the next generations that come into it. So yeah, and that it's one of the reasons, like, we really want to get all vets at all stages, but you know, you guys are the future. So yeah, any suggestions you have. And the other thing that would really help us as we're trying to get the messages out there is, we know full well that you're better at reaching the people. You know, I'm quite good. I'm quite good at reaching the people who are my sort of stage of life that I went to university with, or, you know. But yeah, I have to get my daughter to help me with Instagram. That's how. Once you become a dinosaur, it's hard to, you know. So I think, yeah, please do
kind of take it on yourselves and think, what can I do to reach my generation and my cohort of students or whatever. And we really need that, and we would really love to give you whatever support you need. So keep coming back to us.
Does anyone have any questions? You can type it in the chat and I can read it out if you don't want to, or you can put your hand up. But if you don't want to say anything on the recording, then you feel free to email National FAVS, and then we can always pass it over to you, Fiona. And yeah, we have recorded the session, so we can put that up for people who couldn't make it this evening. But
yeah, and I'll send something around to people who registered, and yeah, anyone who wants to join, become an ambassador, or has ideas or wants us to work with them, we're more than happy. Just let us know. And get out there and do good things. Pass your exams, part of anything else.
Yeah, no, that's good. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for organising, Georgia. That's great.
No problem. So I'll let people log off if they want, or if they want to hang around and ask any questions. Lily says thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Yeah, no worries, pleasure. Let's let's close in. People can email if they've got anything they want to ask they haven't already asked. Jolly good. Thanks, Georgia.
No problem. Thank you so much.
Okay, bye-bye. Bye.